You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome to the Switched On Australia podcast. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for tuning in. Last winter, Declan Kelly tried something many renters may soon be wondering about. Could he heat his rental home on the New South Wales Central Coast for free by timing his energy use to one of the new electricity plans that offers 3 hours of free power in the middle of the day? With the federal government's solar sharer scheme due to roll out next year, offering that same 3-hour window to millions of households, especially renters and people who can't put solar on their roofs, Declan's experiment is a glimpse of what this future might look like. Now, Declan works in the energy industry and he writes for the newsletter Currently Speaking, which is well worth a read if you haven't already. But he's also the Regulatory Policy and Corporate Affairs Manager at Flow Power, which already offers 3 hours of free electricity in the middle of the day. But before we get on to Flow Power's take on the solar sharers scheme, let's step inside Declan's rental and hear what happened when he put the promise of free electricity to the test. Declan Kelly, thanks so much for joining the Switched On podcast.
Thanks, Sam. Good morning. It's really exciting to be here.
Now, Declan, you've written about sitting in a freezing rental home, bombarded by dodgy heating ads, and trying to make sense of Australia's electricity offers. What pushed you to run an experiment on your own home?
Yeah, the impetus for me was actually a talk I was doing for the Australian Institute of Energy. They had a panel, and the prompt for the speakers were "What keeps you up at night?" And I'd done a similar panel the year before, and sort of did some experimenting with our retail plans, and I thought it'd be a good extension to take that forward again. And at the time, it was the middle of the year, and our rental house on the Central Coast gets so cold, and particularly because I spend a lot of time working from home, the temperatures in the house in the middle of the day were to the point where, it's quite kind of unbearable sitting at home trying to work. And I thought, combine that with the fact that I was getting these YouTube ads frequently for these cheap heaters that you could plug into your wall. And I think everyone would recognize these ads because they promise these sort of miraculous ability to heat your home at, a fraction of the cost of what it should really cost you to heat up your home. So effectively, what I thought I should do is I put that all together and test on myself, is it possible to heat your house for free or for a really low cost, and use some of the retail plans that are available to trial that effectively on myself.
And so, what did you do? What was the experiment that you ended up running?
Yeah, so the experiment, there's a retail plan that offers you free electricity in the middle of the day and cheap power overnight. And I thought, if I start with that.
There's a few retailers that offer that, aren't there?
Yes, yeah, there are a few. And there's a multitude of sort of different plans that give you access to cheaper power in different ways. The one that I picked out has this free energy window in the middle of the day, but yeah, there are multiple retailers that have a plan that is either the sort of same structure or kind of complementary structures where you can get access to cheap power in the middle of the day, and obviously that's picking up on the fact that we've got a lot of solar energy in the system. So yeah, what I did is I picked out this plan that gives you access to cheap power and tried to set up a sort of a smart home approach to maximizing the amount of energy I could use in the middle of the day to see if I could get to the point where I could heat my house for a really low cost or for free, ideally. What that involved for me was I picked up some smart plugs, a little controller. We've got some central ducted heating in our house, which is we're quite lucky to have that, and some dehumidifiers as well. That we're up on the Central Coast, and there's a lot of issues with mold and moisture and stuff like that. So we've got dehumidifiers in the house as well to try and manage that. So
Your rental house doesn't sound very comfortable at all, Declan.
no, and I think that's relatable. I think that was sort of part of the point, as well as recognizing that a lot of people, I think, are in a similar position where you are trying to balance the cost of energy and your own comfort. And as a renter, your options are quite limited. I mean, again, we're really lucky in terms of access to ducted heating and even just, energy literacy. I think is something we can take for granted, but yet still, part of what I sort of found through the process of this experiment was actually measuring the indoor temperatures in our house. And like, one of the things that was a really interesting takeaway for me was, if you look at the range of temperature that you sort of guidance for what constitutes a sort of safe indoor temperature, the floor on that is 15 degrees Celsius. So if your house is below 15 degrees Celsius, it's not considered safe. And for the week that we were running the experiment, the temperature never got above 15 degrees Celsius without turning the heating on. So
That would be considered unhealthy, wouldn't it?
exactly. And I think, again, we're relatively young, and push comes to shove, we can turn on the heating, but it highlights a really issue. And I think, it is somewhat well documented and well understood, I think, but the number of people in Australia that die from cold-related illness is far, far higher than heat-related. And
It's quite frightening. I can't remember what the statistics are, but yes, of hypothermia. It totally surprised me when I heard that.
yeah, I think if you know anyone that's come over from Europe or colder climates, they often tell you that it's colder living in an apartment in Sydney than it is in Stockholm or wherever they might be from. So it is a really relatable experience for all the rentals I've been in. It's rare that you find one where you are actually thermally comfortable.
So let's go back to your experiment and where you started. You've got your smart plugs, you've got your temperature monitor, you've got your retail plan with free electricity for the 3 hours in the middle of the day. What happened next?
Yeah, also, I guess like a good experiment, we tried to take it to the extreme. So so I had a look at what power do we normally use, and generally we don't use a lot of power in the middle of the day. We have power we use in the evening, in the morning, and we also have an electric vehicle, so we charge that overnight. So if you look at a normal day for us, it's a relatively flat load in the middle of the day, and a bit of a sort of lump when we're cooking and when our car is charging. What happened when we turned everything on is we just had this massive increase in our power usage in the middle of the day in this sort of free window. So far above our normal levels of energy, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
By turning everything on to sort of heat up the house as much as possible, we actually managed to jump from one side of the safe temperature range, so from being below 15 degrees to well above what's considered, I guess, the safe maximum temperature in our house. So, yeah,
What did you get up to?
we managed to get the house up to 32 degrees,
Wow.
which,
Tropical.
yeah, and uncomfortable.
Mm.
It's a shock trying to work when your house is 14 degrees. It's, I would say, worse going from 14 degrees to 32 degrees over a couple of hours. Didn't feel terribly comfortable.
And so you were trying to pump it that high to what? To try and get the heat to last through to when you really needed it in the evening, is that right?
Yeah, my starting premise was just to, going back to that original YouTube ad that I was getting, which was, heat your house for free or heat your house very cheaply. It was to sort of say, well, if I've got this window to use power for free, can I effectively use that to heat my house for you, as you said, for the rest of the day? And could you do that sustainably? What we saw was that the temperature, there's just no decent sort of thermal insulation here, so that the temperature quickly leached out of the house. By the evening, it had dropped back down to that level. So
Right.
didn't really have the ability to sustain the heating in the house. But also, even if it did work, I don't think you would look at it and say that that's living comfortably, going from there's very low temperatures in the morning all the way up to the 30s and then back down again. So what I concluded was that it is possible to heat your house cheaply. Doing it this way, most of the power used was in that free window. So we weren't spending much money on heating, but obviously it's not the outcome that you're looking for from a temperature perspective or from an experience perspective.
And surely you would be hitting the heater in the evening anyway, because when it gets cold.
Yes, exactly. And that was my sort of other takeaway was that if you were looking at, well, when do I actually need the heater or when do I want the heater on? For most people, I think would be in the evening. This approach isn't effective or isn't sustainable. And the other way you could look at it is to say, well, if this house did have good insulation and thermal mass, it is possible, that you could heat up your house in the middle of the day and you sort of maintain that temperature into the evening. Alternatively, you could have a battery or something like that you could charge up in the middle of the day and access that free power and then use that to power your heating in the evening. But as a renter, better insulation or battery storage are two things that aren't sort of directly available to us.
No, it's not really an option for renters, is it? We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear whether shifting his energy use saved Declan any money.
G'day, Alex Carey here. The Goodwe ESA all-in-one home storage solution is here, and it's a game changer. It's packed with market-leading features, full home backup and 6-level battery protection. With up to 48 kilowatt hours in a single stack, the ESA is a breeze to install with no gateway needed. The Goodwe ESA series is available now and priced to cover the 2026 drop in the rebate. Visit goodwe.com.au for more information.
My guest today on Switched On is Declan Kelly, who set out to see whether he could heat his home for free using one of the new 3 hours free electricity plans. So, Declan, on the financial side, what did you find? Even if the heat didn't hold into the evening, did you save any money doing this?
Yeah, what I found was we saved money in a sense, but if you step back and look at it from a lens of, if I heated the house in the way I wanted to heat my house, was I saving any money? The answer was no. If I had saved money by taking advantage of that free power, and if I'd used that much power on a regular retail plan, I would have paid a lot more. But it didn't. I don't think the conclusion I came away with was that this was a sort of a financially savvy way to heat your house or to minimize your electricity bills. The other thing, I guess, that I did find though was that it wasn't sort of directly part of the experiment, but by looking around at different retail plans and pricing structures, the cost of charging an EV, just sort of incidentally through this sort of process, was substantially cheaper than it would have been if I'd stayed on a regular retail plan. So there was a sort of two takeaways for me. Was there are certain parts of electrified homes and home energy use that are really well suited to a variable price or a time varying price, or taking advantage of these really cheap periods. An electric vehicle is one of those where we sort of back in the envelope tried to calculate how much money had we saved over the year. I think it was in the range of about $1,000 compared to what it would have cost us if we'd just been charging on a regular retail plan. So there was huge upside from an EV perspective, but focusing on heating specifically, I didn't sort of get to the point where I thought, this is a good deal and this is a way to save money, because you're really just putting yourself through some thermal stress in the middle of the day, and you're not really solving the problem. You're not really making yourself comfortable.
So would you conclude from this that the people who are going to benefit most from 3 hours of free electricity during the day are going to be, I don't know, homeowners who have well-insulated homes, for instance? Like you say, they may be able to get into that winter evening and have a warm home.
Yeah, I think I almost, in my mind, wanted to sort of split the conclusions. I think it just highlighted to me that there are issues with the Australian housing stock that the energy market's not necessarily going to fix. And there's a lot you can do with energy and solar and batteries and when you use power that we want to encourage all kinds of customers to do. And even if you don't have an EV or if you're not a wealthy household, that if you're working from home or if you spend time at home, you still can run dehumidifiers, washing machines, dishwashers. There are things that people can run in the middle of the day that take advantage of that low price power. So even if you don't have an EV or a battery, I think there's still opportunities to, for customers who are open to it, to look at retail plans where they do get that sort of cheap power in the middle of the day. What I don't think it fixes, and what it can't really fix, is that we've got a lot of homes in Australia that are like leaky tents. They just don't hold temperature. They're not comfortable. And there's a incentive mismatch between what renters want and what landlords will want. And when I gave the talk, someone asked me, well, did you take these findings and did you approach your landlord and ask them to fix it or address it in some way? And my answer was no, because you don't want to rock the boat with your landlord. And also, frankly, I don't know what I would expect the landlord to do. Would they kick us out to do a renovation of the house, to put insulation in? I think my takeaway was probably that there just is this really complicated, challenging problem of a lot of our homes are just really not well designed and not well insulated. And that is a really big problem in its own right. And it's not something that I'm that familiar with. I'm an electricity person, so I don't really think about building standards and all these sorts of things. But it just struck me as when you had the data and you could look at the temperature inside your own home, that sort of validated these feelings we'd had about how cold our house can get. It sort of really raised this thought for me that we've got to do more to try and fix these houses.
That's interesting, because what you just said, you're an energy person, so you don't necessarily know a great deal. It sounds like you know plenty to me, but you might not feel this way. It's much about building standards, etc. Do you think that this is part of the problem that we've got with the transition, that we're actually not drawing on all of our resources? And let's start talking about the Solar Sharers program, because that's an attempt, obviously, by the government to make use of some of this solar, which is going to be wasted and basically thrown away if we don't use it in the middle of the day in the future. But it's not necessarily solving all of our issues when it comes to the transition.
Yeah, and I'd say there are some groups out there that are really focused on that intersection of buildings and homes and energy. And one that comes to mind is there's the Energy Efficiency Council, who are really focused on energy efficiency, and in that is thinking about buildings and building standards and insulation and all those really important things. On the solar share offer, yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a the government has announced the intention to introduce a requirement to effectively for electricity retailers to offer the plan that I used for this experiment. So the idea is that by default, all retailers would have to have an electricity plan available to customers that allowed you to access free power in the middle of the day. And in terms of what it means for customers, I think it's still an opportunity. And these kinds of plans, I think, as you say, there's a lot of solar in the system, and the rate at which we're installing solar in this country hasn't really slowed down, despite regular predictions that the rate of solar will slow down. It hasn't slowed down. That is a really important part of the transition, and the solution is looking at, we've got a lot of solar power. How do we encourage people to think about when they're using electricity in their own homes and their businesses, and align it with that solar window and that solar period? Because it's good for the solar, it's good for the networks, it's good for electricity bills. There's a lot of benefits to trying to align those two things. And we've done that in the past as well. We historically have been, people understand the concepts of peak and off peak, but it has historically been, we'll shift your electricity usage to the evening or to late evening and overnight, where the historical context for that was to help coal generation run through the night.
Because they couldn't turn off, essentially, so they needed to keep pumping in the evening.
Exactly, and a lot of hot water would run overnight just for that same reason, which is essentially to soak up our excess coal generation. So it's not a foreign concept to energy users, I think, to know that there's a structural underpinning in the market, which is that there's going to be an excess of energy in the middle of the day, now driven by solar, not by coal. And so how do we give people the tools and the incentives and the education and all these things to take advantage of that? Because there are upsides for customers. Whether is it going to solve all ills? Obviously not. I guess based on my experience alone, you would say that there are other challenges out there that need to be addressed in parallel around our homes and people's comfort. And again, going back to that point about not the people like me in their 30s who, this is sort of a fun experiment, but there are a lot of people out there that are vulnerable and thermal comfort is a really massive issue. So that I think does need to be treated with a lot of importance in its own right. But yes, going back to energy, it's an important opportunity to give people a better outcome, both with respect to their electricity bills and the transition overall.
I mean, it seems like it potentially will solve some of the problems for some of the people, but it's certainly not going to be a cure-all for all of that excess solar or for people's use of energy, because there just really are going to be some people who can't really make the most of it. I suppose the concern is we don't want to penalise those people who can't make the most of it. Shift workers, parents, people with fixed routines, renters who can't necessarily install smart appliances or who have houses that feel like tents.
Yeah, that's right. And there's never going to be a silver bullet, I think, in the energy transition. So the solar share offer, which is what the government's announced, as well as all of the other retail plans that exist that give people access to a variable price or a price that's cheaper in the middle of the day, they're not suited for everyone. And there will be plenty of customers that are going to much prefer a stable price or a flat price or a simpler retail plan.
Or a cheaper price in the evening, because it's likely that a lot of retailers will put their tariffs up in the evening to compensate for the fact that they're giving free electricity out during the middle of the day.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I think, and this is why we have a market for these retail plans. The idea is that customers aren't homogenous. They have their own things that they might be looking for in the energy market. It is still a complicated market for people to engage in, but I think in terms of are we going to find a retail plan that suits everyone? Never. And everyone has their needs and their own patterns and their own plans, and they will gravitate to the retail plans that work with them and what they want. In terms of the solar share offer itself, it does raise an interesting question, I think, of the sort of role of what markets do and where governments should step in. And from our perspective, I think you've hit on one of the challenges there, which is that if you're requiring retailers to offer free electricity in the middle of the day, there are still costs associated with providing power at that time, and a lot of those costs are outside the control of the electricity retailers themselves. So they have to pay for the costs of the distribution networks. So that's the sort of poles and wires that connect your house to the grid. They can also pay costs related to jurisdictional and state schemes as well. So the retailer itself is potentially incurring costs in that free window when they would be passing through sort of free electricity to the customer. Ultimately, the retailer does have to set up their pricing in a way that they can recover those costs, and that will be, as you've said, There's reflected in the prices outside of that free window. So in the morning, in the evening, and overnight. Obviously there are retailers that already offer this plan, and they've made that trade-off. They've looked at how they can offer free power in the middle of the day and what they need to do to be able to offer that product, which is generally, as I said, high prices in the morning and the evening.
And I should just mention or reiterate that you're now speaking as a representative of Flow Power and less as a consumer at the moment, Declan.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing I like about our industry is we get to be both. We are
Of
all end
course.
users, and we are also industry people in our own way. So my experience is, guided by both the experiments I like to conduct, but also, as you say, I work at an electricity retailer and think about these things from that perspective, as well as that sort of more direct at the coalface experience as a consumer.
Just from that point of view of I suppose, a smaller retailer, I mean, Flow Power has put together a submission in response to the solar sharer offer, which does highlight some of those issues about those costs, which the retailer will probably pass on to consumers. What do we know about the offer as it stands at the moment? Because essentially, consumers, half their bill, 50% or up to 50% of their bill, sometimes less, is constituted by the network costs. Is it going to be the retailer that will have to cop that and then pass it on?
Yeah. I mean, I guess to start by saying this is all still out for consultation, and the department and they are asking questions from industry and interested parties to submit on. So this is what we at Flow Power have responded to, and in our response, I think the starting point for us is we do really agree with the intent and the objectives, I suppose, that are underpinning the solar share offer. So the idea, as we've touched on, is well, let's give people access to cheap power in the middle of the day, because that's really reflective of what our system is saying we have and what we want people to respond to. And you'll probably hear that consistently across everyone. It's important to work out how to give people the opportunity to benefit from that cheap power. The challenges that we've highlighted, and from the perspective of a smaller retailer, where we sit in the overall supply chain is that we buy the power from the wholesale market and we pay for the network costs and other costs associated with the system, and then you'll see that as a customer reflected on your bill. We don't have control over the network pricing, so the costs of the distribution network, again, those sort of poles and wires, but we have influence over our costs of buying power in the wholesale market. So the concern that we sort of highlight in the paper is that there are processes on in parallel, thinking about how do we charge, as an industry, how do we recover the costs of the distribution network, and what is the appropriate structure of those prices. And those tariffs, they're called network tariffs, the sort of pricing structures associated with the distribution network, are trending in the direction of being cheaper in the middle of the day and higher in the evening and the morning. But
Do they need to move down faster?
well, I think what we would like to see in parallel with, if a solar share offer is going to be introduced, and what that would obligate retailers like Flow Power and others to offer a window of free power in the middle of the day. I think what we would like to see in parallel is network pricing structures that complement that quite strongly, so that if the network cost in the middle of the day is zero, then we can pass that straight through to the customer on top of free power or cheap power in the middle of the day.
As long as there was a guarantee that there would not be a rise in power in the evening. It is very easy for retailers to increase those costs in the evening either way. You'd want some guarantee that if the network charges were going to drop and you obviously didn't have to pay them, then you don't have to pass them on to consumers, that there still would be very clearly that there wouldn't be the rise in the evenings.
Yeah, well, and I think this, again, that tension between, I think, what the government is wanting to sort of effectively mandate versus what does competition amongst retailers deliver. From our perspective, and this is from Flow Power's perspective, our retail plans let customers respond to the variable price for electricity, and so that means generally cheaper power in the middle of the day, but at the same time it means typically more expensive power in the evenings and in the mornings. And we see that as, again, it's not for everyone. It's definitely not, these kinds of products are definitely not for everyone. And we would never want to be in a position where we're saying everyone needs to shift over to a retail plan where they have to grapple with low power or cheap free power in the middle of the day and more expensive power in the evening. But for the customers that do take that step and go onto a plan along those lines, I mean, what that is communicating to that customer, and if this is all part of what needs to go alongside this, is helping a customer respond. But what we're trying to encourage customers to do is effectively say, if you can move your power out of those peak periods into the middle of the day, there's a double benefit there, because we're getting people to soak up the excess solar, but we're also shifting power out of that peak period where we are still going to be reliant on fossil fuel generation to cover that gap. And increasingly batteries are helping to manage that peak period, but at the same time, it's still important to get people, if we can, the customers that can, to encourage them to shift their usage out of that window. So there is no free lunch, so to speak, in that if we want customers to have access to free power in the middle of the day, it probably will come with a higher price in the morning and the evening. And it's really the thing that I think we should be making sure we encourage in parallel is helping customers understand the choices that they have. So they obviously don't have to take up this offer or any retail offer. They can seek out a sort of a fixed rate plan or a flat priced offer if that's what they prefer. So, letting them take up more variable price products, with the proviso that if you can respond to those prices, you probably will be better off than you were on a fixed rate plan. But again, as I sort of keep saying, that we should also recognize that consumers are incredibly varied in terms of what they're looking for and their abilities to engage and the tools they have at their disposal. So we certainly shouldn't put them all in one big group and say, well, let's put them on this new plan. Isn't that going to be great? They'll all be better off. It's not going to be that at all. The other point is the benefits of people starting to respond to these prices. And it's never going to be as direct, I think, as you'd like it to be to sort of make this point. But the more that you can get customers changing their consumption patterns and when they use power in aggregate, so it doesn't have to be everyone, but if you can get the aggregate to change, it does mean that sort of overall system costs should come down, because we're less reliant on expensive generation in peak periods. We're using more of that rooftop solar and solar in the middle of the day that's really cheap and plentiful, and we're avoiding having a peaky system, which means that network costs tend to be higher, or we need to build more network out to manage those peaks. So there are a lot of overall benefits to these kinds of plans. Those comments, I guess, all relate to the style of retail plans that encourage customers to shift their usage. As we sort of highlight in our response, I think it's a separate question as to whether you need to have a requirement on all retailers to offer a plan. And that's what the Solar Share offer would do, is effectively require all retailers to offer. Again, if sort of split out those two things, you can say there's a lot of benefits and there's a lot of upside for customers and the system as a whole if we can do variable price plans well, but there are risks around mandating it, and just mandating it with a focus on retailers without thinking about, okay, well, how does that work in parallel with networks and other parts of the system?
Declan Kelly, thank you so much. And thank you for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thanks, Anne. It was a pleasure.
And Declan Kelly is the Regulatory Policy and Corporate Affairs Manager at Flow Power and one of the writers for the energy newsletter Currently Speaking. And yes, he's also living in a very familiar Australian reality, a rental home that leaks heat as fast as you can pump it in. That's it for this episode of Switched On Australia. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for listening. Join me next time for more news and analysis on Australia's clean energy transition.